Config 2025 happened. I want to chat about it a little bit. So, Config 2025 happened, and I'm not going to talk so much, I think, about the features or the substance of what they've a little bit, but more about like the market realities of what this means, I think. And yeah, it's interesting. So I think a lot of core Figma users are expecting to have new features in the core tool. They got a couple of bits, but in reality, most of this was about new products and new product categories and the reason for that. So what have we got? We have Figma Draw, which is a thing, I guess. It's some brushes inside Figma. It's kind of cute. It's part, I think, of a push in terms of like capturing more of the sort of free tier people and people, trying to get more people to pay for it as a tool to do things like illustration. Again, it's a kick towards like Illustrator and Affinity and all that lot. I don't really see how this ends up super successful. I know a lot of people are like, I only use Figma for everything, but in reality it needs to be a lot of paid seats, and a lot of people do only use Figma, but the reality is most of them don't. And graphic designers have an awful lot of tools. If you look at them purely as tools, Figma's really deficient for illustration, and this goes some way to addressing that, but this has, again, this stink of throwing a thing at the wall and quick implementation. It's some brush strokes and some on-canvas filters, and that's kind of it. It's throwing some stuff at the wall. Let's go into grid. It's a grid layout. They've written this as part of their push into Figma Sites. Figma Sites is directly to address the likes of Framer and Webflow. As we know in the past, Framer was originally a competitor directly to Figma as like a UI, UX-y tool thing. Quite wisely, they sort of exited that market when they realized they couldn't really capture enough market share, and they pivoted towards becoming a website builder. They re-leveraged the tools they had quite cleverly, and they've had some success there. They've done pretty well. I don't love Framer as a tool. It's all right. It serves a certain purpose, and Figma rightfully won part of that market now. So they've quickly, I've not played with this yet personally, pushed together Figma Sites to try and start being, a place. And the idea is this is all about consolidation, right? Having one location where you spend more of your time as a creative. The problem is the tools in Figma are not mature enough, and their rate of growth at the moment is not is too rapid, I guess, to really allow them to mature, unless they go into a quiet period and then allow these tools to mature and take on more of this market. So far, they haven't really done that with the likes of FigJam. I doubt they will with Slides. I doubt they will with Dev Mode, which they've marketed as a product and really as a feature. So the sort of through line of all of this, what I'm really trying to get at here is, here we go, Figma Buzz. We've got Figma, but Canva. The thing is, the sort of through line of all of this is, these are all quite quick. They're all quite not low effort as such. So the grid thing is there to facilitate the use of grids, because grids are part of the Flexbox and grids inside CSS. So they've exposed it. Deep under the hood, Figma technically is a web application. Their canvas does not use HTML and CSS in the way something like Penpot does. But, deep down it is broadly web technology. They do a lot of stuff under the hood to make it more performant and allow you to do some of the things that sort of bend the rules of what layouts do on web, but whatever. The point is, the through line of all this is ultimately because they've saturated the core market for UX tools, and also having a free tier means that they have a lot of extra users on top of that as well. And the company is looking to IPO. This is what we call portfolio stuffing. It makes you look like you've made a load of stuff, and it's a really standard move when you try and sell a company, is to stuff the portfolio, make graphs go up, or have speculative graphs to point at, to say, look, we've got all of these new avenues, and here's the projections we've got, and here's the projections on this revenue we've got based on these things we're doing. And they're targets you don't actually have to necessarily hit. You have to say, we've done this thing which potentially could hit these targets, irrelevant of whether you do or not. And this absolutely stinks of that as a move, basically. So, that's why I'm not really down with all of this. Figma Make, they've put in more AI tools they're doing basically Vercel's V0, but inside Figma. This is kind of interesting, actually. But also it's relatively easy to turn around. It's some interfacing and then some training on an LLM. They might even be licensing some technology from Thingamajig, who's it? But yeah, you can leverage other LLM models and give it some constraints moderately. I'm not trying to make out it's a one-click thing, but it's moderately straightforward to get an LLM and produce stuff like this, and that's just building some UI around it. So it's, again, quite a fast turnaround, like relatively speaking, quite a fast turnaround thing. So here's what we've got. You see how there's very little mention of updates to FigJam or to Figma Slides. And here's the thing, right, where this comes down to is when you have, from my last bit of information digging I did, I found the market for like UI-based tooling to be around, and it's a little bit old, these numbers, they might be off, around 4 million seats. So that's your total addressable market, right? That's the total potential number of licenses you can sell. It's also around the same number of Figma licenses that are out there in the wild. Now, Figma do not have 100% of the UI market. They have a pretty good chunk. From what I can tell, it's probably in the order of about 65 or 70%, which is huge. That's incredibly dominant. But that's not 100%, which means that not all of those seats are paid seats. And of those seats, how many are paid? We don't know. We don't have that breakdown. And they've got a lot of free seats that they want to try and, make them buy full seats. They've done that by, slowly whittling away what you can do on the free tier of Figma, which I don't really care about the free tier of Figma. I don't feel like tools should be necessarily free. Might not be a popular opinion in this day and age, but I think good tools are worth paying for, especially if you make money from them. I'm not super even that upset about subscriptions for tools for things that you actually use and are moderately reasonably priced. It does leave you open to enshittification. It's all down to the scruples of the company running those products in terms of how they leverage those subscriptions and that revenue. The incentives in capitalism mostly mean that you are going to enshittify, and there's a sort of like enshittification pandemic going on where I watched another video recently and they put it as a case of like it starts off providing greater value to the end user, slowly whittling away those features to increase revenue, and then when you get your corporate interests, you then have to then move those investment over to them, which that tends into enshittification. You have to make a different party happy, but in that first section, you're delighting end users by providing them a lot of value for not much money. And by the time you get to the other end, you hope they've forgotten that it used to be a quarter the price, did more, and they got feature updates more frequently. It's the machine, it's capitalism, it's what it does. But yeah, this all stinks to me of a company trying to sell and stuff its value. And the other thing that I found very telling is we go into, let's do Figma pricing. We'll see what's changed recently. So I think it's the latest pricing. No, this is the most recent pricing. So they recently did a price increase. A full seat includes dev mode. Originally that was a paid edition, but it's not anymore. You've got your Figma design, which is Figma. You've got a Figma draw, which is not really of any true value. If you've used it yet, it's really rudimentary. Figma Slides and FigJam. Now, FigJam was the big hotness. It was their second product. It was meant to be a competitor to Miro. Miro is very popular and it's a pretty big market, and they want to get a foot in. And the idea of consolidating all of your users, and you've got a place where they're happy and you can build good tools and leverage technology you've already written to do new things, it's very enticing. And at first I thought FigJam was pretty cool. It's not really changed much. They've definitely slowed down on the feature work on FigJam, and also when they started moving FigJam seats into full seats. So standard playbook stuff would be, well, you pay extra for this feature, and then you include it. And they raise the prices to include part of the revenue towards FigJam, which says to me the fact that they haven't got much. So we've got a collab seat here, which does these two, but I think $3 a month, £3 a month. It's gone right. What's it monthly? Yeah, £5 a month. The bundling of the seats is a way of sort of, I think that is telling that they're probably not selling enough FigJam seats. I don't have numbers. I wish I did. I could probably seek some out, but I would wager that the idea of actually making some penetration into Miro's market has not been successful. Otherwise, you'd see a lot more development around FigJam. And instead of doubling down and increasing the quality of FigJam as a tool and increasing the interoperability with Figma and opening up new avenues for workflows, no, they released Slides. And Slides is equally kind of half-baked. It's kind of cool. It does some fun stuff. It's still really new. It's not very old at all. Probably, a year old maybe? That's not going to meaningfully make impact on Microsoft or PowerPoint or Google Slides at this point, because I think these moves are too late, ultimately. When you have incumbents, they're very hard to unseat. And the longer you wait, the harder they are to unseat. And you have to do something either significantly better or very high value, or a lot of interrupt with your existing suite of products. But you need to build each one of those products to be mature first, and then you can start grandfathering people in. That's why Google Office, what was called Google Suite, G Suite, was quite effective in the first place, because they had Google Docs for quite a while. They had a dominant email product. They have obviously the rest of Google as well. There's a lot of reasons to be in their ecosystem. They had Android. They had all this sort of stuff. They had then released Hangouts, because Google push out in all directions and spend quite a lot of money, and the Google of it all, right? The killing of the tools and putting them out there and seeing which lives and which die. Obviously it annoys end users, but they end up in a lot of cases, not all cases, but in a lot of cases, they end up with the ones that actual people want to buy and use. Then when you start saying to them, hey, you can have docs, which are actually very, very good at the time, revolutionary, right? Very similar. It's a very strong parallel to Figma. The reason why Figma became so big was because the biggest part was the real-time collaboration, which was an idea that wasn't pioneered by Figma, as you had believed. It was actually something from other products probably did it as well, let's be real. But it became really prominent with Google Docs. It was a revelation in the 2010s, the idea of Google Docs at the time. If you were working on Word documents or Excel spreadsheets, stuff like that, you weren't working with other people. And this was a place where you could. It was also free. It was also part of Google, and it was also a really, really good product. And it's exactly how Figma became so big in the first place. They did almost everything their competitor did. Some things much better in the case of the real-time collaboration. And that's how they won that market, as well as being cross-platform. But that's really overstated in the comparison with Sketch. With these new products, they're not doing that. They're much more also-ran in terms of what they are as a proposition, right? So FigJam is basically Miro, but worse. Figma Slides is basically Google Slides, but worse. You see what I'm going here? Dev mode is something of dubious usefulness. It sounds really good on paper, but in reality, it's a really hard problem to solve. It's not a toggle in a tool to solve developer handoff. It's very sexy to say, yeah, we have a thing which does this thing. It's not that simple. I don't think it's been a great success. I imagine it hasn't been. And anecdotally, it's of dubious usefulness, dev mode. And, the same goes for things like when you've got this Figma draw thing. What does it really represent? Let's look at it. So we're here inside Figma. We'll turn on draw mode, and what we've got, let's just make a frame. And it's effectively, is it even working? There's some white. That's why you can't see it. So in red, there we go. It's some brushes and some filters and not much else. And these are very reminiscent of the tools inside Affinity, actually, believe it or not. This is also white. But yeah, this is on par with something like, these are not the best vector tools in the world. They're pretty bang average, to be honest. Similar to what you get in something like Excalidraw. They certainly haven't got the fidelity of something like Illustrator. And it raises the question of why? Why are they doing this? And this goes back to my main point. These are sort of half-baked features. And it's not to say, I'm not being a naysayer or a skeptic for the sake of being a naysayer and being a skeptic. My thing is the reason why they're doing it. And I think with the last few years especially, they've exposed themselves as a business that's much more interested in growth than the tooling and actually serving their customers. Ironically, they escaped being bought by Adobe only to become Adobe. Adobe aren't even as bad as them when it comes to actually maintaining their tools. Adobe do a better job of it. So, I know, contentious. But yeah, recent updates in Adobe has been very focused on AI. At least those AI tools, a lot of them are actually quite useful. Don't worry, it's a mild praise of Adobe. I don't like Adobe at all as a company, but you've got to give credit where it's due, right? And they do push out bug fixes. Headline features inside Figma that have been around for a few years are still unfinished. Look at variables. I don't even know where it is in UI3. I don't use Figma at the minute, but it's around. They're around somewhere in this interface, but they're an unfinished feature. They kind of put out a table view. They've iterated on it slightly. They've done sort of cute, easy win features, like they've introduced this thing recently for doing contrast checking, stuff like that. They haven't been standing still on the product, but they are not iterating in the way they are because there's no incentive for them to do so, right? If they've sold 4 million Figma licenses or they have 4 million users, not sure how many of those are paid. I imagine it's a much smaller proportion of those users. Then they haven't got much incentive to really put as much money into Figma as they used to, the core tool, which is, again, one of these sort of very much 2010s era market capitalist things, which means there's not incentive to do it because the line need to go up. You can't just make a good tool and maintain good tool. We've taken on X number of billion in venture capital funding and we need to start paying them back. And also we need an exit for ourselves. What can we do? What can we leverage? What tools do we have? How can we reframe this? Let's put some paint tools, right, into Figma. Let's split out dev mode into a paid product that isn't really worth the money. Let's build FigJam, which is not something we're going to commit to. Let's have a look at FigJam quickly. Let's do a FigJam thing here. Yeah, we've got AI generation. Great. These are very low impact. We've got some new shapes. Great. We've got the plugin things. Have these been updated? Are there any new ones? Not sure. The reality is most people use FigJam because they've either already got it, and I'm not sure how many people actually go out of their way to make use of it. In reality, it's one of those things. So that's the point. I think they're just trying to stuff the portfolio, and they may or may not. I mean, I think of these products, the one that's going to make the biggest impact is probably going to be Figma Sites, because they're going up against Framer, and effectively that's, for them, technologically, it's a moderately easy thing to do, right? They have to build, well, I say moderately, but it's a thing that they can do. They can make, they can output HTML and work on the missing features, but the actual underpinnings, I imagine, the same way it was for Framer, are already there. But Figma have significantly more resources, and Figma is a better tool than Framer was when Framer pivoted. So they'll have a good chance of displacing that. But I don't know the size of that market. You ask your on-the-street design person who doesn't really think too much about beyond, the job that they do, and they'll probably say, well, at some point we'll be able to just create a Figma design that will just encompass all of web development, product creation, as if it's that simple, as if it's that's they're not part of a workflow or part of an ecosystem which generates much more complicated things. We should understand it's not that simple. There's the reality of Framer is it's really useful for landing pages, portfolio sites, stuff like that. It's really a competitor to like WordPress on the lower level, or Wix, or those sort of things. It's not really a competitor to the royal task of replacing all software development on the internet. But if you listen to some people, they make it sound like it is. It's not. But and there's workflow things that are coming, I think, which I think Figma being prudent here. A big part of the problem with all of these tools that they don't solve is the handoff to developers. Dev mode doesn't solve it. The workflow should be much more around generating markup from the off. The last 10 years, as the design industry has moved further and further towards standardization, right? And repetition and componentizing things and standard practice, you've got front-end developers who've become so much more design aware because they implement a lot of the same patterns, they spend time immersed with it, and they understand it, they learn the design process. There's some front-end developers who are fantastic at interpreting what you want from a Figma design, who don't have as much need for those handoff features because they can intuit what they need to do. Given my age, I'm old now, but I've been doing this since the 2000s, right? So maybe like 20 years or so, coming up to 20 years, I think. And back in the day, they called us all web designers. I sound like such an old person. But obviously, the thing was, back then, you had sort of a spectrum of how technically capable you were, but you were expected to both design and execute front-end code, right? There wasn't really the concept of front-end. There's building websites, right? And you either knew PHP, which was all PHP back then, or you knew some HTML. And if you design the website, most people, with varying degrees of, there's complexity in this, but a lot of people are expected to also execute the code as well. Now, given the way front-end development has also coalesced around a series of standards, you've got things like Tailwind, which is incredibly popular, which is almost a de facto way to build front ends now. Again, there's a degree of standardization and consistency, and these tools are better than Figma for creating responsive layouts and websites. Figma is an abstraction of those tools. It's a layer to make it more simple. It doesn't actually necessarily work better. That's not its prerogative. It's to make it easier to use for people who don't know how to use those tools. Now, the reality is, there's going to be increasingly going forward more design-aware developers and then probably more code-aware designers. And I think a lot of those roles, not everywhere, there's be a lot of instances where it'll work better to keep those roles separate. But I think given how the industry is contracting and trying to cut costs, it seems natural to have companies encourage that web designer style role to exist. It's actually more viable now than it was 15, 20 years ago because of the amount of standardization, how mature both markets have become, both industries have become. So that won't be lost on Figma. And that'll be part of their motivation for sites that fulfills part of that role, but also the generation stuff. I don't hate V0, actually. I don't love it. It's not, I don't like the whole vibe coding thing. It's stupid. But, the thing that I've said about AI tools for the longest time is it won't take that many jobs, but it will create a lot of very useful utilities longer term. When all the buzz has died down, I think we end up with a lot of very cool tools to make us more effective, which actually does still end up meaning that there's less jobs because people are more productive. And there's squeeze across the bottom ends of lots of creative industries at the moment. Junior roles are leaving. But this contraction does come to lots of industries. It's not unique. It's just our turn at the plate, right, to have this happen to us. It's happened to scientists in the past, engineers in the past, like mechanical engineering. It's happened to the finance industry. It happens all over the place. At some point, you get a lot of jobs when something's in boom period. When it starts to solidify, they get harder to enter again. And then normally there's new industries that crop up to replace those gaps in the market for those people on those higher wages, that kind of thing. We're not at that point yet, so it feels very hard when you're in it. But that's reality of probably what's happening. Either that or the entire West collapses, which is probably equally as likely at this point. Anyway, trying to be positive. So I think this will be not lost on Figma, all of this, the idea that they need to form part of this ecosystem for modern ways of working, which is a really good way forward for them. But also running interference is the idea that, they want to sell the company and they need to stuff the coffers, and they're doing it instead of by doubling down and sincerely trying to take market share. I mean, all of this is built off the back of being in the right place at the right time. Sketch built this entire specific tooling category and they did it better in a lot of ways, right? They read the room really well. They came at the right time with the right product, and they built a very expensive company at the back of it. Not entirely, the economic conditions meant that they could accelerate things quite a lot, and they've certainly pulled some of those levers to move faster. And now this is them paying the piper effectively for those boom times, which means they've got incentive to stuff this. So instead of trying to sincerely make competitors to incumbent products, they are releasing things like some paintbrushes and Figma and slides, but not amazing, and Miro, but not amazing, because they can't touch these incumbents. Like if you go back to the thing with Microsoft Teams, right? For Slack, again, revolutionary tool, right? Having this non-linear communication. Hey, don't do email, do this. Let's repackage the idea of a chat room effectively, but for business. And then obviously Discord, again, has also displaced the idea of a chat room. They're the same thing. They just have they're just presented a little bit differently and much more polished. And Slack was huge. And then the idea of Microsoft wading in and destroying them almost overnight with Teams was kind of inevitable because, again, they're incumbent. They have what we call a moat, right? The idea is you go where the people already are, and if they introduce products that are compelling enough, they will steal away that business. So if you are a little third party, let's say, if Adobe had released XD the same time Figma had released XD, Adobe XD would be where Figma is now. It's about timing and incumbency. Figma are not necessarily an incumbent in the same way Adobe are. They have a much smaller share of the market, the same way Slack has a much smaller share of communications than Microsoft. This is why Microsoft has also, with Teams, basically eaten Zoom's lunch. The only the only industry company, to have really stood up to the onslaught of Microsoft is Google. But Google are also a multi-trillion-dollar corporation who have, these things matter. These things are indicators of your success, right? And you do get independence. Let's look at Miro. Miro could be displaced. It's a very good piece of software. Right now, you've got companies like Microsoft. They've introduced Microsoft Loop to take on Notion. But then it's when you build your own little moat. In the case of Miro, they've got their own little moat of the, sort of like digital whiteboarding. Figma has this UI product. And then Notion has this sort of free-form project management / documentation Notion thing going on. When you're an incumbent, you're hard to unseat. That's why I don't think something like Penpot, which is not a very great piece of software, to be honest, or Sketch will ever regain this seat as the most prevalent piece of design software in this space. However, when you don't have a big enough or powerful enough product portfolio and you wade into someone else's playground and trying to cross their moat, you kind of need something very compelling to steal that market share back. Otherwise, you're not going to do it. So as normally a company with more established suite of things taking on whatever can wade in, these sort of moves tend to never really work. And if you compare like the situation with Affinity versus Adobe, there is this sort of, and Affinity's they've done really well as a company. They aren't going to take over Adobe. That's not reality, unfortunately. They make better tools, and that's how they did it. They made a suite of 3 tools that are, in a lot of ways, better, tangible benefit, while the core one's being price, but, that's not everything. But yeah, they've carved themselves a really decent little niche. They can exist. There's room for more than one of everything, and competition is great. The odds of Figma getting success with any one of these sort of new spin-off tools, the exception maybe of Sites, because that's them punching down effectively rather than punching up, and I'm certain they have more money than Framer do. They might have some success, so that's quite a natural fit for them. But that's why I don't really talk so much about what's in these tools, because it's more about what they're doing. And the real thing, you're going to take anything away from this video of a guy talking in front of a static web page for most of it, is Figma don't care about you. They don't care about your core product. Figma, I think, will get better over time. They will improve things, but the rate at which they have little incentive at this point, they've already got your money. Why do they need to do anything else? They can either leave themselves open to be unseated themselves, or you have to just suck it up and continue, and it becomes an Adobe/Microsoft situation where you have to pay them and hate them for it, but still give them the money. And this is the phase of their existence we're entering. There is an alternative. This seems like a propaganda piece, but it's not. It really isn't. I think if you're a consumer, you should vote with your wallet, right? And you should, if you don't like things, the way to tell companies or anything is you take your money away from them. So if you don't like what they're doing, you don't like any of these tools, you don't like lack of focus, if you can, and only if you can, I'm not saying ruin your day to make it better, seek moving to other tools. If enough people do it, they will change. They will refocus. But until you do that, they aren't going to change course because they have your money. They don't want to listen to you anymore. They will listen to new money or have other people's money. There's no incentive anymore for them to listen to you. And they've proved to have the inclination to not want to listen to you at this point. The love period is definitely over. I think this is going to get worse before it gets better. And I expect increasingly slow feature rollout as they spread their resources between, frankly, way too many tools to try and maybe bake some of the new tools a bit better, or inevitably double down and make the core Figma tool a lot better. But seek alternatives. Sketch is out there. Sketch is still really good. They aren't actually evil. It's interesting. You've got Penpot. It's not great, but it can be, maybe. Who knows? There's alternatives in this space. Maybe also seek out some of these alternative workflows. Like I was saying earlier in this video, the idea of having development-aware designers and design-aware developers and those roles coalescing. I'm not saying you should go and be a developer, put down your pitchfork. What I'm saying is having a bit of that knowledge for the sort of businesses that will seek out those people, and to say that you can do both bad, that's not true. There's a lot of crossover between these two roles, and also other things can move around to absolve parts of those roles that aren't necessary for your time, right? So you've always seen this level of stratification with people who just manage design systems, and you've got people in Figma just assembling parts and component systems. Things can move. I'm all saying is by leveraging broader things in your skill set, you can become better at your craft. Writing HTML and writing CSS are just other tools to lay out boxes on screens. They just tend to be maybe a slightly harder learning curve at the beginning, but actually pretty easy in the grand scheme of things. Not that distracting. And I know there's a lot of devil in the detail of all this. What I'm saying is don't just accept the things that companies give to you that are shit and moan about it and not expect anything to change. Or get upset when things change. You need to vote with your wallet. I'm seeing the big backlash against Adobe. I'm not sure. Adobe's so incumbent now that I'm not sure you can ever really get rid of them. Even I've recently had to pay Adobe again for some stuff after not really paying Adobe anything for a few years. It happens. What I'm saying is, though, is if you can, and you don't like any of this, and you don't want to use these new products, vote with your wallet. And if you do like them, awesome, great, more power to you, make use of them. But there are other options out there, and just try and detach your feelings about the individual tool or any sort of sense of I'm in this group, I support this team, from the economic realities of most likely what these businesses are doing and why, because that tells you a lot about the future. That is the end of the video. I hope you've suffered through it, and if you've gotten to the end, then you've gotten to the end, and here we are. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe or anything like that. I don't care if you subscribe, but have a wonderful day, and that is the end of the video, and goodbye.